In this goal, we're going to be comparing and contrasting the positive and negative effects of nuclear radiation. Here's a list of positive effects of nuclear radiation. So the first thing that I thought of was eradication of pests. So radiation can be used to sterilize male insects, and then they can be released out into their environment and they can mate with females, and the females will not produce viable eggs. So in this way, you can keep the numbers down. The also preservation of food. When you go to Europe and go to buy milk, it is sold on the shelf. So what do? They take and milk the cows. They pasteurize it. They put it in the milk carton and then they radiate it. And this will kill all the bacteria that's found in the milk, and it basically makes it sterile. I mean, until you open it and drink it. Um, and so this is a way that they're able to keep it uh, without spoiling for longer. We've already talked about how nuclear radiation is a source of clean power because there's no greenhouse gases. There are a lot of medical uses, treatment of some tumors. So they can actually take a beta emitter, and they can target it at the tumor. And again, as radiation really affects those cells that are rapidly dividing, just like the tumor cells are, then that tumor can be killed off. It also will target your hair follicles too. So you usually lose your hair because those cells are targeted too, and they'll stop growing for a little bit. And so as a result, your hair falls out. And the same thing with your digestive tract, has rapidly dividing cells. And so that's one of the reason why usually this radiation therapy is accompanied with nausea. People get sick because those rapidly dividing cells in their digestive system are irritated. It can also be used for space batteries. So if you send a satellite up into space that needs a battery, you don't want to have to go and change it. So we need a really long lasting battery, and plutonium is the element usually used to make those space batteries last a long time. And also radioactive tracers. So if there's a molecule you want to study or some sort of process in an organism, you can hook a little radioactive atom onto it, and so you can trace it through that metabolic pathway or whatever it is that you're trying to study. There are also negatives, of course. So you probably thought about, well, you can die from it. Yes, if you get enough, you can die of radiation poisoning. And we've already talked about some of the other negatives. So uh, the digestive system can be targeted, causing nausea or vomiting. Your blood formation can be affected so that you're not producing red blood cells, white blood cells as you should. And if you get enough, then it will also target your nervous system. Um, it also can cause genetic mutations, so really won't affect the parent, but it will affect the offspring. It can cause cancer if you get a high enough dose. Sterility, what works in insect, can also cause higher organisms to become sterile so that they do not produce any offspring. Uh, and when you do see that there's been a large dose, it can show up as birth defects. So when they dropped the two atomic bombs in Japan, the people that were in those cities that survived, they actually told the youth that when they were adults that they shouldn't have children because they got a real good dose of radiation. So the radiate, and that was to again to prevent birth defects in their children. Um, so plants, they are living organisms, so they can be targeted too. This is a picture of the forest outside Chernobyl, which is a nuclear reactor in Russia that basically it had no lid to keep the nuclear meltdown controlled, and so the radiation was spewed into the air, and you can see that it killed the forest off. I think this is very fascinating to see this line. So these plants got too much. They had just a little bit less that they were able to survive. Okay. All right, and we've already talked about what do you do about if you have nuclear waste? Who's going to store it? And what are you going to do if water leaches in and carries the contamination away? And you can probably think of some other ones, but here is just a good list of pros and cons of nuclear radiation.